Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Faster Masters Rowing Radio, where having a rowing coach only makes you better. Following a program gives you a true pathway to becoming a confident sculler who's respected by your peers. You can become the athlete you want to row with. I'm Rebecca Caroe, and as ever, I'm joined by my co-host, Marlene Royle. Hey, Marlene.
Hi, Rebecca, and hello to our Faster Masters.
Yeah, what a week it's been. There's always that kind of scramble, isn't there, towards the end of the month?
I know, and seasons are starting to change, at least here in North America. You know, everyone feels like spring has sprung. So some people are getting on the water, some people are watching the ice melt from the edges, kind of thing. But we're definitely in transition now.
We were comparing notes earlier, and the air temperature is the same in New Zealand as in Canada today.
I know. I said 20 degrees. You mean Fahrenheit? I said, no, 20 centigrade. It's 20 centigrade. So.
Actually, what I said was, what is that in real money?
Yeah, real money.
That was the phrase that people in Britain used when they changed to decimal currency in 1971, because they went from pounds, shillings, and pence to a decimal-based system of pennies.
Actually, I remember, because my grandparents lived in London, and I remember it in the 70s, pounds, shilling, and pence. So
yeah,
it was much more interesting.
My mum, because you used to represent that with the pound sign, which is a loopy L, and obviously S for shillings. And I've no idea why pence was represented with the letter D, but my mum always called that LSD, and she never realized that I thought she was talking about drugs.
Oh, God.
So while we're getting going, if you're watching live, hello to all of you. Please tell us where you're watching from, because if you don't tell us you're here, we won't know. We won't be able to give a shout out. So just put a little note in the comments underneath the live stream, and we'll do a little shout out to you all very shortly. In the meantime, our sponsor continues as the Rowing Chat directory. This is something that I've been building with my Rowing Chat business to try and make a yellow pages for the whole of rowing, so every rowing business. And we have some new listings. I'd like to draw attention to the URL, which is www.rowing.chat. And then at the top menu, it says directories. You just click there and it takes you through to a page where you can see all the 16 different categories of business. And in there, you will find the End of the Island podcast, which is all about junior rowing in the UK. You'll find ES Rowing Services, which is the #1 in the UK for boat repairs and spares. Under events, you'll find the head of the Schuylkill Regatta, which of course is a very well-known fall regatta in America. Also, Independent Rowing News, which is the leading print magazine for North America. And you'll remember last week, both Marlene and I feature in the current issue. Kangwa is the UK agents for international boats at entry-level pricing. Junior Rowing News is a website with eyes on the ground for UK junior rowing. And lastly, Champions Connected, which is a new service to help you get recruited to a university using a mentor system of international US rowers who can help guide you and your application as you head away towards trying to row in college. So welcome to our live audience. Hello to Andres from Philly. Hey, hey. He still has that lovely sunny photo up. And someone who's from Plymouth in, where's MA? Massachusetts?
Mm-hmm. Massachusetts,
Nottingham?
yeah.
That Nottingham, that's definitely in the UK. We need to know your name. We don't know who you are, Nottingham person. Hello. Lisa McMath is calling from Colorado. Hey, Lisa. And another unknown visitor from the Argonaut Rowing Club in Toronto. Good stuff. Deanna Massev from the Olympic Peninsula Rowing Association in Port Angeles, Washington State.
This is Jess, yeah.
You read it out.
Hello, ladies from Jess in Pennsylvania. Just finished a tough workout today from Marlene and am so excited that I did it. Of course you did it. Can't wait to get on the water. Soon.
Here's our Nottingham person. It's Charlie Adams. Hello, Charlie. And Pamela Thompson from Dunedin in New Zealand. Hi, Pamela. And our very loyal #1 live watcher, Cece from Whitby, also in Washington State. And someone from South Africa. Hooray. At least I'm guessing South Africa. That's very cool that we are global, Marlene. I think we can officially confirm.
That's 5 countries already. That's terrific. Absolutely.
Isn't that great?
Yes, so quick. Very fast.
Take a look at my photo for today. So this is a photo of Arex Asserman and his buddies having a dock picnic. I'm guessing it's in Toronto. They're all masked up, and you can see their sculling boat sitting on trestles just in the background. And the remark that he made on the photo was, "This was the best day of the year." Well, Arex, thank you. And I totally echo your sentiment. I think a dock picnic is something we could all aspire to.
Yes, it was the weather was beautiful. And also, here in Canada, especially Ontario and Quebec, people were little by little starting to be able to move around a little bit. We've been in lockdown for a long time. So, people haven't had picnics for a long time. So it's a doubly nice kind of.
I had a friend who used to regularly have picnics, but he had them in front of the television in his living room. He called them carpet picnics. And Tony has joined us from Sherbrooke.
Oh, he has a new picture now.
He does. Nice picture, Tony. Like that. Now, this past week, this is the segment in the show where Marlene and I talk about the work that we're doing to more generally advocate for Masters rowers. You guys, our regular listeners, know that we are trying our best to make Masters rowing better for everybody. We're doing this by helping to educate people that Masters matter. We're also trying our best to see what we can do to make it easier for people to join and to enjoy the different elements of Masters rowing, which is not the same as competitive senior or youth rowing. So, Marlene, what was on your schedule for this past week?
Well, on Sunday, I represented Faster Masters Rowing Radio on a rowing podcast roundtable, which involved many, many different rowing podcasts from around the world. And it was hosted by Tara Morgan and Rachel Freedman, who created the Steady State Network. And they have a rowing podcast themselves. So they organized this and got a lot of us together. And it was quite fun on a Sunday afternoon. So I think if you go to steadystatenetwork.com, you could find that episode. And Rebecca was also there, and she was speaking about rowing chat. So we were both there.
We were both there. It was really fun to have a lot of different podcasters, because you could really tell that the things they did were so different. And I loved that. I thought that it was entirely appropriate. Yeah.
We had the Row Show guys. And who is the name of the podcast? The girl who does the Coxswain's podcast.
Girl on the River, which is Patricia Carswell. So that was she's cool. Subtitles that a pint-sized rower, because as she points out, she's actually sized for a coxswain, but she prefers rowing. No, that was good. I particularly, it was great to have, the South African guys who do all the international interviews. And they fitted in between their training as well, which is
they were at training camp in Lesotho. Imagine, they weren't even in South Africa; they were in Lesotho. So it was
which is a mountainous area. So that would be altitude training, wouldn't it?
It must be, yeah.
Yeah,
but that was cool. It was cool.
That was extremely enjoyable. And for my past week, I have a medal. Does anyone remember the January 1 event called Rowing from 2020, when you had to row 2,021 meters and submit it? Well, we did that. And the race organizers made these absolutely enormous medals of this wonderful man who's crying on his ergo. And they're huge. Look, the medal, you can see it next to my face. It is one of the larger medals I own. So that arrived in the mail, which was very nice to receive. And we also, some of us got T-shirts as well, which was
that's great.
And then this past week, I also did I am representing Masters on the New Zealand Rowing Domestic Committee. And they had a meeting last night. And I gave a report on the progress that we've made thus far. We had 5 goals, which was firstly, to speak with one voice nationally for Masters, to grow membership and participation, to have more regattas and different race formats, both coastal and flat water, at suitable times of the year, to have more social events, and to have access to effective coaching. I won't tell you the report, but if you're interested, it's on the New Zealand Rowing Masters Facebook page. I put the full report up there so you can have a look at that.
Oh, another event we had last week was the U.S. rowing webinar of coaching Masters athletes with Bethany Callery from Cape Breton University. And so that was interesting. So anyone who is a member of U.S. Rowing can access that webinar. And it was more about their studies in how to coach Masters athletes. And they've been developing some survey tools and what types of things are important to Masters athletes, and things helping coaches know how to better coach Masters athletes. So it's a work in progress. They have a very interesting site, coachingmastersathlete.com. And there's a survey there that if you're interested in helping the cause of Masters rowing, please go on their website and click on the survey. And it asks you all different questions about how you like to be coached and what's important to you. And they're developing a really handy tool that will assist coaches.
Nice. That is excellent. Now, a quick reminder for everybody that Marlene and I are hosting a webinar on a functional movement assessment for Masters rowers. The date is Monday, the 29th of March at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can sign up for free on this link. The link is bit.ly/functional movement rowing. And you must have capital letters for F for functional, M for movement, and R for rowing. Otherwise, the link doesn't work. The link is also going to be in the show notes. And if you watched last week's program, you can get the link there. It's completely free to sign up. And what we will be talking about is, cue Marlene.
Yes. Well, you will, when you sign up, you will be able to download a PDF, which is a functional movement assessment for rowers. And so we go through 10 exercises that are very important for your mobility and flexibility to be able to perform the stroke properly. So have that in hand when you join the webinar, because what Rebecca and I are going to talk about are how to remedy those issues if you identify mobility issues, and what some of the corrective exercises are. So I would recommend even, give some of those motions a try beforehand, and see which areas might need a little bit of extra attention, because we're going to talk more about how to address those issues in the webinar.
Yeah, we don't want you to be doing the tests while we're on the webinar. What we're going to talk about is what you can do about it, and also how it affects your rowing in the boat. Because at the end of the day, we all know that there are some things that we can't change. You might have an injury or an immobility, but there are things that you can do in the boat to ameliorate the effect of something like that. And that's the important thing, is how do we apply this to our own rowing?
Mm-hmm.
here we go. Someone says they just signed up. So thank you. Delighted. Looking forward to seeing you there. And Stephen has joined us from Worthing in England. And a lady called Nikki, who is a Australian in Britain, I think.
Yeah.
Hi, Nikki. I can't quite see the flag. It could be the New Zealand flag and the Australian flag are very similar. One has one more star, and the New Zealand flag, the white stars have a red outline. But trust me, when you're looking in pixels, it's a little too subtle for me. But very, very nice to get some British people online. This is simply because the clocks have changed in the UK. So it's great. It makes us a little bit more accessible.
Mm.
Oh, she's a Kiwi, she says. Thanks, Nikki. Good to get that right. You know, it's kind of like mistaking a Zimbabwean for being a South African or a Canadian and thinking that they're American. It's the easiest way to insult someone, isn't it?
Or Slovenia and Slovakia. That gets mixed up often because in Slovakia, sometimes it's spelled it looks like Slovenia, but one letter different. And so sometimes on a map, you think it's Slovenia, but it's Slovakia. So you've got to know where where Prague is and where Bled is, right?
Right. They're next door to each other. So geographically, it's also, tense. I remember my dad years ago lightly teasing a lady who was an au pair girl working for my parents, looking after me and my siblings over the summer. And we drove over the border between England and Wales, and he turned to her and he said, "You have got your passport, haven't you?" Poor lady. Now, our first topic for today is one that's extremely close to my heart. Needless to say, Marlene thought this topic up. And when we talked in the green room earlier, I said, "So what are we saying about this?" And she just looked blankly at me. And what did you say the last time you were in a quad?
I said, I've been in a quad once in the last 10 years. And actually, that was in a race that the Team Chinook tossed me into. And actually, our Jeanette, she's not online right now with us, but she was in the boat too. And thank goodness I wasn't towing, but I do know how to tow a quad, but I have not done it in a long, long time. So you are the steering guru.
So this is me on my own. Towing is American for steering, just to be clear to our international watchers. Don't think it means towy. If you're British, you'll get that joke. Now, steering any boat, pair, double, quad, even an 8. There are a couple of really, really important things to know. In an 8, you will not be steering while you're also rowing. So let's exclude that for now. There are 2 methods of setting up the steering. One is with the rudder wires crossed, and the other is with the rudder wires parallel. It's important that you check which one it is that's set up the first time you're in the boat, because if your rudder wires are crossed, then what happens is you end up pointing your toe in the direction that you want to steer the boat. So if you want to go towards the stroke side, which is to your right, you point your toe to the right and the boat will start to turn in that direction. If the rudder wires are parallel, it's the opposite. You point your heel in the direction that you want to go. Now, having said that, steering any boat is a distraction from your sculling or rowing. And so my first recommendation is divide up the tasks between the available people in the group. So what that means is you might need someone to steer. You might need someone to look around for hazards in front of you. You might need someone to do the calls. But the key to enabling you to steer with the greatest confidence is to have you just doing that and nothing else. So if you can give the calls responsibility to someone else, do it. In New Zealand and also in Australia, they have a tendency to put the steering in the stroke seat. This is because when you're on a straight lane buoyed course, actually the stroke seat is the best place to be because you have that perfect view of the converging lines, which obviously are parallel, of the little buoys, the buoys down the course. In the UK, it's much more traditional to actually bow steer. I think that's partly because most people in Britain row on rivers that have bends. And if you're in the bow, you can turn around and you get that perfect view of what's in front of you. When you're steering and looking round, here's what I recommend. Focus on doing one thing at a time. So when you know that you need to look around to check for a bend or a hazard like a bridge or something, don't worry about your rowing at that particular point. Focus instead on what you have to do for the steering. So finish your stroke, take the oars out of the water and get to what I call the safe position, which is how I describe it to beginners, which is legs straight and arms straight. So your oars are out of the water. You won't crab as long as you keep downward pressure on the handles. And you've got time during the recovery to turn around and take that look. Remember, looking over your left and your right shoulders gives you a different view, and you also need to be able to look right around and actually see the bow ball of the boat in front of you. And for the strokes, while you're doing that, you might take 2 strokes to do your look. You might take 1. Do not worry about your sculling. Just do what feels right. You know, okay, it feels like now would be the time to put the oars in the water, so do it. Then when you've completed your look, you then know, do I need to make a steering correction? If the answer is no, then just bring your front of mind focus back to your sculling so that you can start to row well again. If you do need to steer, then make a small adjustment. Unless there's a really close hazard and you need to, be really quick with your response, I strongly recommend that all of your steering is done extremely gradually. So you might choose to make your steering maneuver over 4, 5, 6 strokes. It doesn't have to be done fast. I'm going to use my hand to illustrate as if it was my foot, just so that you know what I'm talking about. So here is me with my foot straight, and I know I need to make a small steering maneuver. The first thing I do is push my heel down and make sure that my heel is touching the foot stretcher so that I have a clear point of contact. I know that you're continuing to scull while this is going on, and your heel will come up naturally in the sculling stroke. But for the steering, when you're ready to steer, push your heel down and then make a small movement. And a small movement of even 1 centimeter where the wires are attached to your shoe. So a 1 centimeter adjustment is actually quite a lot. And then wait 3 strokes. Just row for 3 strokes. And during those strokes, lift your eyes up to the horizon. So look over the head of the people in front of you and fix on a point on the bank that you can see. It might be a tree or a house or a chimney or a church spire or whatever. And watch for that very slowly shifting over those 3 strokes as you begin this turning maneuver. That will give you a sense as to how quickly you are turning. A lot of people feel that if the turn doesn't happen in 1 stroke, that they need to then move their foot even further. And generally that is mistaken, unless you've totally misjudged how far in advance of the obstacle that you need to make your maneuver. You should be able to wait those 3 strokes. And remember, the boat is going to turn at the midpoint of the boat, which is not under your seat generally, unless you're in a double or a pair, in which case it's just in front of you. But, if you're in a quad, it's going to be pivoting between the 2 and the 3 seat. So watch the horizon, see how much you're turning. You've got 3 strokes where you can focus on good sculling. Then when you're on the next recovery, take a look around and see whether or not the boat has turned to your satisfaction, or whether you need to leave your foot, heel down, remember, if you can, in that slightly turned position so the rudder wires are still active and steering the boat, or whether in fact you can then correct and bring your foot back to vertical. And this is particularly useful at this stage to have a visual cue which can help you. One thing that some people do, if you have a wing rigger, is you can have a little bit of tape, colored tape across your rigger, which lines up with the tip of the shoe. You might put the colored tape also on. Usually it's a triangle of metal, which the steering wires connect to, which is bonded to the back of your right shoe. So you can see those two bits of colored tape line up, or whether they're slightly out of adrift. And when they line up, then you know you've got your foot straight. That can be quite useful, particularly if you're learning to scull. And then you know visually that the steering wires are now symmetrical and that the rudder should be straight. That's my beginning recommendation for how to do bow steering without your sculling going to pot. The short answer is only do one thing at a time.
Yeah, well, that's an amazing overview. And, you know, you can see how if you're really good at that and you develop that skill, how actually really valuable you are. You know, that's a whole nother area of the boat that one can row. But it definitely does take skill and practice and focus. And I think somebody who can steer well is so valuable in a crew, because you can certainly lose your races with somebody who cannot steer properly. Absolutely. Yeah. So great overview.
Thank you. Oversteering is generally what will happen if you're nervous or inexperienced. And that's why I do advocate steering quite, expecting the turn to be gradual. And different boats are really different as well. And you should know that, because until you know your boat well.
So Rebecca, when you have the tow and the cable, the wire that's going to connect to the rudder, are the rudder lines in all boats always crossed, or do some crews row with them straight and some crews row with them crossed? Because that would make a difference, right? Huge.
Big difference. That's right. Different clubs are different, and different national systems are different. So you'll probably actually, if you're listening, tell us what's your default in your club or the boats that you use regularly. Are your rudder wires crossed or uncrossed? So I have borrowed boats at regattas from other clubs. I particularly remember a pair that Anna and I did in Queenstown in the South Island of New Zealand, where I said I'd steer and they were uncrossed, and I was less familiar with doing that. And of course, we literally got in the boat in order to row down to the start. And there were a couple of moments where I was like, move my toe, needs to steer. And of course, I'm on autopilot. And I was like, whoops, I've done it wrong. I need to move my heel, not my toe.
Yeah, that's like a panic moment. And it reminds me, for people who coach, okay, if you're using an outboard motor, they're Mercury motors and they're Hondas. Okay, so Mercury motors are American-made motors. Hondas are Japanese-made motors. The stick to accelerate the throttle are opposite.
No.
So yes. So if you have been raised, as I was, in United States coaching, where I was coaching all those years at Craftsbury, we used Mercury motors, and they work, and at Florida Rowing Center too. The throttle goes one way. And then I went to a club. I remember I went to Atlanta Rowing Club to do a weekend clinic, and they had a Honda, and that was the first time I ever drove a Japanese motor, and it's opposite. So when you think you're slowing down, you're speeding up, and vice versa. So it was quite shocking, because you don't want to, you're relatively close to people, and the last thing you want to do is run over one of your scullers. So that is something if you're a coach and you're maybe visiting different clubs or something, know which type of motor you're driving, because my default is the Mercury, which is completely opposite from the other one. So it's a little bit like straight lines or crossed lines.
Yeah, it is. Now we have a
Definitely.
question. Do you generally look behind you every 10 strokes? So the short answer is no, unless I am on an unfamiliar river. So where I regularly steer is the water that we train on regularly, and I know it well. I know what all of the trees and bushes and markers are around the lake. So, for example, we have a point in the lake where we're going straight, and then there's a very large red buoy which is used for sailing. So it's around 1 meter tall, so it's a big one. It's incredibly soft, so actually it doesn't matter if you steer into it. And we have to go around that buoy before we can go into the bay on the far side of the lake. So I'd like you to visualize you have the bank on your left, the open lake is on your right, and you're rowing along. And I know roughly how many boat widths are between me and the bank. So firstly, how have I positioned myself? Am I closer to the bank than usual, or have I got maybe room? You can sort of like quickly visualize, is there room for one boat, 1.5 boats, 2 boats, maybe 3 boats between me and the bank? If it's 3, I am going the wrong side of the buoy. I know that. And so early on, that the straight there is around 650 meters. And it's not totally straight. I mean, the bank goes in and out. But I know that we can go pretty much in a straight line. I line myself up with the willow tree that's on the bank. And so long as I have the stern of the boat lined up with the willow tree, I can go straight. But I'm beginning to think about that next buoy, which is coming up on my right-hand side, which is stroke side, port. And then I take a look over my right shoulder to locate that buoy. So I'll use the exact method. I'll get onto the recovery, take a good look around. Can I actually see the buoy? And sometimes I look too early. No, I can't see it. Or sometimes it's dark. It's frequently dark nowadays, and I can't see it. So then I'll do another 3 strokes because I know roughly where I am. I'm not going to hit the bank. There's a good 100 plus meters between that buoy and the bank. So I'm not going to hit the bank if I have overshot. And I then look again, and that'll probably be 3 strokes later. And sometimes I'll look during 2 strokes. I carry on rowing with my eyes not facing the right way. And once I've located that buoy, then I have a good sense of the distance between my right-hand blade and the buoy. Is it 1 boat's width? Is it half a boat's width? I mean, that's the kind of range I'm looking for. What I then do is I then start to look over my left shoulder because I need to go around a very small rocky headland of the bank. So I know how much gap I've got on my right. Then I look to my left as I start to turn. And I'm looking over the left-hand shoulder to look past the headland into the bay beyond, because I can usually, even when it's dark, I can see the silhouette of the edge of the headland and the tree that's there. And so I can tell, are we going to row past that? And once we've rowed past that, I no longer need to look around because my 2 hazards, the buoy and the headland, I've managed them both. And then once I'm past the headland, then sometimes I straighten up a little bit so we go straight into the bay instead of just going diagonally across it, because sometimes there are other crews out and obviously you don't want to be obstructing them. Sorry, that was a long answer to, do you generally look behind every 10 strokes?
But then you get to row, scull, finally, after that big procedure.
Yeah, so Cece comes up with a really good point here. Do you want to read this?
Yeah, totally, Cece. Cece writes, I have found that when you row on tidal waters, things move. That they sure do. Driftwood floats off the beaches and moves with the current. Buoys change distance from the shore to the waterline. So I look often to confirm all these things. Definitely, and certainly, if you have boat traffic, that's an issue too. But tidal issues, curves, currents. Some currents can push you out, some can push you in. Absolutely.
And gravel banks. Honestly, if you're close to the shore, which you probably are because you're on a shallow boat. I remember finding this rowing on the Tideway in London, and my blade was grazing the bottom of a gravel bank that definitely wasn't there the week before. Here's another remark from someone. I think it also depends on how busy the stretch of water you row on is. That is so true. As to how much you turn around. A stretch of water like Lake Papuki, which is where I row, is a wider stretch of water and fairly quiet in comparison to the Tideway, where you only have a very narrow path of navigation, and where to be safe, you do need to look around every 3 to 5 strokes. I totally agree about being cognizant of what's going on around you. However, I would caution, looking around every 3 to 5 strokes, you do not stand a chance of getting into a good rhythm over the length of an outing. And if you can look ahead and think, look, I can get 10 strokes in before I need to look again, then at least you can give that 10 strokes as your full commitment to the crew and the crew rowing, because even a really skillful steersman, you can feel the boat shift as they turn their head. You have like 15 pounds, I think is what your head weighs. It's 7 plus 8 kilos. It even just turning it will mean that your weight is no longer neutral in the middle of the boat.
That's true. And if you're watching your speed coach, even if you're in your single, every time you look out of the boat, your speed drops. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Also, if all boats and crews are moving in the traffic pattern, you should not have to look around any more than you really have to. So, that's assuming people are following a strict traffic pattern, because that also makes your life a bit easier being the steersman.
Yeah. And also, if you are, as Marlene says, following that traffic pattern and you know what the bank looks like, say you're close to the bank, you can do a really simple sideways look, which I'll just illustrate like this. If you turn your head so your chin's over your shoulder, you can actually see way off into the front. You can't actually see your bow ball, but you can see a lot around you. If you hold up your fingers like this and pull them back towards you, and you get to a point where you can tell they're just going out of your line of sight. If you do it with your arms extended, you actually get a very good sense as to how far your peripheral vision can actually see. And your peripheral vision is not good at focusing on a single object, but it is good at spotting movement. So like if you have your finger and you're like moving it backwards and forwards like this, you can see it go in and out of your peripheral vision. So actually a 90-degree turn with your head, a glance over your shoulder, can actually give you a lot of information, and it doesn't disrupt you nearly as much.
And that is a motion we will talk about in the functional movement assessment.
Good point. Cece says she got a depth finder for low tide rowing. She hasn't tried it yet. I think that's just one thing too many. How much electronics have you got?
I was going to say, Cece's boat is like mega outfitted. Like, we want a picture, Cece. Just tell us. We want to see the dashboard, how everything is set up.
Like the Starship Enterprise or Concorde or something.
Exactly.
Hello from Jeanette in Dundas. I wish I could get used to using a mirror. Dodging recreational boats can be all consuming, and it makes it difficult to get a continuous piece done. Totally hear what you're saying, Jeanette. That is very, very true.
I can't. I have difficulty rowing with the mirror. I just get dizzy.
I answered a question about mirror rowing. We have a couple of clubs who are members of Faster Masters, and they get a private Zoom call with us each month. And I had that exact question. I hope I answered it satisfactorily. Jess says, after doing my first doubles head race at Welland, Ontario, Canada, and the head of the Occoquan in Virginia, USA, I now understand why knowing the course is such an advantage.
Oh, you mean you were taking a tour, that we call it?
Yes, we should be friends with my mate Zoe. Zoe nearly always parks herself in a tree. It's like, oh, Zoe, did you take the scenic route? We used to tease her.
She's stuck in the weeds. Have you been stuck in the weeds? I've been stuck in the weeds at the head of the Housatonic. Nice big turn.
My friend Sarah, she parked one of our quads in the weeds.
Yep. Come to a dead stop.
Oops. Quickly. Doesn't it stop you fast?
Yep. And then you're like, oh no, how do I get out of here?
So, it's a soft landing.
Very much so.
All right, last question on the steering. Lisa says, I find when I give a big yank at the finish, get out a little early and then look behind, it's less upsetting to the quad and gives me more time for a looky-loo. Is that bad or good? I think, Lisa, if it's less disruptive, the guide is that's probably a good thing. my goal would be to try and stop doing that and row as consistently as you can. But understand the moments when you need a long looky-loo and a quick looky-loo, and try and, be judicious. Now,
touring the aquaquad.
Our next topic today is preparing for the release.
Yes, and Lisa set this up for us perfectly, because if you give a big yank going into the release, are you sure you can get out early or on time? That's the question. Okay, so I love talking about the release. This is one of my favorite quadrants of the stroke. So let's talk about what is the release. Let's call it a critical instant. Okay. In the rowing stroke, we have two critical instants. We have the entry and we have the release. When the blade goes in, when the blade comes out. We all know that if our timing is not precise, we have issues. But today we're going to talk about the release, because I find this is a very challenging area for many people. And it is, I was going to say, if I could give most people one tip of how to increase their boat speed in the shortest amount of time, I would say nail your release, learn your release, because your release is going to help you keep the boat accelerating and capture momentum, whereas a poor release, staying in the water too long, getting stuck, is like, putting the brakes on every time you want to take the blade out of the water. And we don't want the boat to know when the blade goes in. We don't want the boat to know when the blade comes out. So for the release, you have to prepare for the release. And many scullers, I'll talk about it from a sculling point of view, and our principles apply the same for sweep, except from a sculling crossover in a sweep boat, it's going to be our perpendicular point. But think of preparing for the release just the same way that you're ready to prepare for the entry. But most people don't think about preparing for the release. All of a sudden it's there and, oh my God, now what do I do? Oh, the moment they think about it, it's too late. The boat's moving, things are happening quickly. You've got to be ready. So my proposal, which I think helps set you up for a beautiful release, is to begin your preparation for the release on the drive when you are at the crossover, if you're a sculler, or your handle is at the perpendicular if you're in a sweep boat. Okay. The reason I say start the preparation at this point is because you have about 1/3 of your drive left. The boat is increasing in speed. It's going to come upon you very, very quickly. So if you don't begin to make that transition and get ready, you're going to be late, you're going to be stuck, you're going to be in the water too long. So at the moment of the crossover, focus on keeping the pressure on the blade all the way as the boat is now moving past the blade, the boat is increasing in speed. You need to maintain pressure on the blade until the moment of release. And it's very easy at that point to stop your suspension, to interrupt the pressure on the drive at that point, and basically not take advantage of the last third of the drive. So one exercise I would have for people who are on the water, or for the future when you get on the water, do an exercise that you're on the drive, and when you get to the crossover, as soon as your elbows start to bend, think about applying work into the blade. Okay, so as your elbows move out, put pressure out towards the tip of the blade instead of pulling the handles to your body. If you break into a pull, your blade is going to lose the pressure and it's going to slip. If you work into the blade as the boat moves by it, you want to hold that even pressure so that the blade does not slip. in that last third. And as soon as your hands are in a sculling boat about a hand width apart, tap down and feather away. So your blade is already starting to release. It's designed to do that at about 30, 35 degrees. Your blade starts to come out of the water. So simply tap down and move your hands away. But you must hold that pressure in the last third in order for it to help you through that critical instant.
That's so true. And one of the consequences of not holding the pressure is when you've got the blade in the water and you're on the power phase, the water piles up in front of the face of the spoon. If you don't hold the pressure, the pile begins to reduce, and basically there's a hollow behind your blade that begins to fill up, and that means it's harder to take the oar out of the water at speed.
Yes, it absolutely, and good thing to mention, at speed. Okay, as your release timing and the amount of time it takes you to execute the release is going to depend on your boat speed. So as your boat goes faster, the release timing moves closer to your knees. Now, this is a quote from Dick Dreisiggaker. Okay, so let me say it again. As the boat speed goes up, the release moves closer to your knees. So you have to get out of the water slightly earlier as the boat goes faster.
Do you think you actually get it out earlier, or you just start to think about making the movement earlier, Marlene?
I think it's a little bit of both, but there is a actual different handle position when the boat's going a little bit faster. It's going to move a little bit more in front of your body. With that said, the release point is always the release point. It's just when people are rowing slowly, they tend to be too long. So they're creating a lot more wash and drag. And should I tell my Michelle Garrett story?
You should.
Okay. So here's my Michelle Garrett story, which is via Larry Gluckman. Michelle Garrett, our Olympic sculler from the U.S., silver medalist. This is a true story. Now, she was training on the Charles River, and her coach, Charlie Butt, attached a motorboat to her boat and started to pull her at the speed that they were training to go in the Olympic final. Okay, so they determined what that speed was for gold medal time, and he started to move her boat at that speed. And through experimenting, okay, she had to figure out where was her release point in order to keep the boat at her race pace. She had to figure out where that release point was to keep the boat at that speed. And that is how they determined where her release point is.
That's fascinating, because by coincidence this week, I was sent a video by a friend who showed us what the Dutch rowing 8 are doing. And take a look at this.
Veel meer schaven aan de techniek die ze straks onder hoogspanning nodig hebben in de Olympische finale.
Grap is dat je dan dus eigenlijk met hogere snelheid
And I'm just going to pause it there, because that's most of the video. They talk a bit. They had put actual motors onto the hull of the 8 beside the coxswain, and they were learning to row at the speed for the Olympic final, is what the coach says. And he basically came out and said, I need the guys to be able to train at that speed without being at 100% effort. And so the motors, exactly the Michelle Garrett story, push the boat along somewhat quicker than they can propel, because they only look like they were paddling at, I don't know, 24 maybe. but they get used to the blade work that they need to be able to execute.
Cool. That's super cool. Yeah, I love it.
Jess makes a point here about the release. She says, I've wondered, when Marlene says pressure into the oarlock, how do we accomplish that? Is that adding weight on the handle by pushing down, or is it literally pushing with the thumbs into the oarlock? Good question. Clarify, Marlene.
Okay, very good question, Jess. And first of all, focus your work to the blade. So you don't want to ever lose contact with the oarlock or the pin, because you're losing contact then with your rigger. Okay, so that's a constant 100% of the time in your stroke. If your collar pulls away from your oarlock or your pin, your riggers are no longer supporting some of your body weight. All your weight is going into the seat. So that's something that must stay constant all the time. What changes in the drive, now remember, we're talking about the drive phase. In the beginning of the drive, the first, say, 2/3, okay, from the moment your blade is in and loaded to the moment that your blade is at the perpendicular, your blade is to the bow side of the pin. So by the fact that you're sitting tall, by the fact that you're driving with your hips, you're trying to apply your body weight on the handle between the shoulders, handle and lats, keeping your lats down, you've got weight into the pin because the blade is to the bow. And so as you're moving the boat past the blade, now we get to straight across. Okay, the boat still continues to move. The boat is moving past the blade. So now as the boat keeps moving, now the blade is to the stern side of the pin. So that's where this area of transition from the perpendicular point to when your blade moves to the stern side, the mechanics of it, the vector changes. So your weight, that the system is no longer doing it for you. You have to make that transition to pick up that pressure on the blade smoothly, not to interrupt it, and then to maintain it as that blade swings towards the stern or your boat moves past that point of perpendicular. So it's really done from your core strength and your lats. So that's why I said focus on not using the hands and the thumb to do this. It has nothing to do with hands and thumbs. Focus on, if I'll see in the camera, if everybody who's watching, put your hands on top of one another like this. Okay, say this is the crossover. Now bring your hands towards you. See how your elbows spread apart? As your elbows move out, focus, like almost drive your elbows out. Focus on maintaining the pressure on the blade. So that's your key. The moment the preparation for the release begins when the elbows start to break, and you simply want to make the transition from the system doing it for you to you doing it for you, so that you don't lose the pressure and you have the pressure to take the blade out.
That is a beautiful demonstration, and also one of the main reasons why sweep is different from sculling. In sculling, one of the reasons why our elbows move out to the side is so that you can keep a 90-degree angle between your oar handle and your forearm. Mm-hmm. In sweep, your outside elbow needs to go directly past your body. You don't want your elbow going out to the side, because that tends to engage your shoulder. And it also means you're not drawing through to the finish, the exact thing Marlene is describing. So your elbow goes past your body, pointing to the person sitting behind you. Think about it like that in sweep. Whereas in sweep, your inside hand has the control and the power because of the rotation around the pin. After you come from square off, your inside hand can start to work harder because the oar is pivoting in the oarlock. And so your inside arm is very close to being at 90 degrees to the oar handle in that very last bit of the power phase. And that's why you move from outside to inside arm when you're actually doing sweep rowing. You don't notice pulling on the outside arm particularly, because mostly that's the hang. That's when your legs and back are working in the first 2/3 of the power phase. But your inside arm, you can really add a lot of boat speed by working your inside arm right at that very last bit of the finish.
And in sweep, your inside arm is like your sculling arm. I mean, in Larry Gluckman also, one of the great sayings that he has is when you're sculling, it's 2 inside arms. So again, the important thing is directing the pressure to the blade so that your blade pressure, once you enter the water through the entire drive, you're not braking and trying to catch pressure on the blade. You have to pick up that transition as you move through the perpendicular so that you have that pressure and the pocket behind you, which is going to help you come out, because the blade starts to release itself on its own. So you're really only responsible for half.
Very true. We have created a light bulb moment, Marlene. I think you and I have, we've done it. This is the moment to quit while we're ahead. Very glad the light bulb went off for you, and please, go practice.
Absolutely.
So this has been Faster Masters Rowing Radio, where having a rowing coach only makes you better. Following a program gives you a true pathway to becoming a confident sculler who's respected by your peers. You can become the athlete you want to row with. Stick around, subscribe. We have a newsletter which will tell you everything you need to know about what's coming up. And I'll give you a sneak preview that if you're thinking of buying our program, get on the newsletter now, because we're going to be doing an offer to coincide with the end of March. So if you're thinking of buying a program, hold off just a couple of days and come on the webinar where we'll also talk about the offer, but it'll come to you through the newsletter. So that's fastermastersrowing.com/newsletter. Till next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.